Great. Welcome, everyone, and thank you for joining us this evening for a special lecture by Dr. Barry Johns, hosted by the Global Studio in collaboration with the Cross Canada Housing Super Studio and Architects Against Housing Alienation. Before we begin this evening's lecture, I would like to start with a land acknowledgement. So we acknowledge that the land we are gathering today are from many places across Turtle Island as we are gathering virtually. The traditional and ancestral lands of the Indigenous people who have cared for these territories since the earliest times. Across what we now call Canada, these include the lands of the First Nation, the Inuit, the Métis people, whose knowledge, language, and cultures continue to shape our collective future. We honor the relationship Indigenous people have with the land, water, and community, and we recognize that our work as architects, as educators, and as citizens take place within these living territories. Today's lecture, BAAKFIL and the Housing Crisis, builds upon Barry's doctoral research in his recent publication, Effective Urban Densification, A Guide for Professionals and Housing Industry. This evening, Barry will share his vision for BAAKFIL, a model for densification amidst a housing crisis. As we gather today from institutions, disciplines, and regions across Canada and the world, I encourage everyone to deeply engage with these ideas. Housing remains one of the most urgent issues of our time, and conversations like this are essential in shaping more equitable and sustainable futures. After Barry's lecture, we'll have lots of time for discussion, so please feel free to place any of your questions within the chat box or raise your hand after the lecture. I'm going to now pass it over to Dr. Douglas MacLeod to introduce Barry.
Thank you very much, Veronica. It really is an honor for me to introduce Barry. I've worked with Barry for the last 12 or 13 years, and I would have to say he has become a living legend in Canadian architecture. Not only has he received more than 60 design awards, including the Governor General's Award for Architecture, but some of his buildings are absolutely iconic. For me, for example, the Grant MacEwan College in Edmonton really still defines the skyline of that city. But even more than the buildings, he's done an amazing amount of service to the profession. He was the Chancellor of the College of Fellows at the RAIC for 6 years, the Director of Practice for the Alberta Association of Architects for 4 years. He's an Honorary Fellow of the American Institute of Architects. And when he participates in these organizations, it's not like he's checking a box on his resume. He really pushes them to be innovative and to really think and care about the profession. I also have to say that if it wasn't for Barry, we wouldn't even be here this evening because about, oh God, maybe even 15 years ago, Barry and others pushed to revitalize the RAIC syllabus program, and in the process, created the Center for Architecture at Athabasca University. I've also seen him teach. He taught a design studio for a dual credit design studio for us with Cynthia Duval in downtown Edmonton in 2019 with students from Central High. And it was a pleasure to watch him get all of these young people who had struggled to get out of high school so interested in architecture. However, tonight, what we're going to be talking about is a new dimension of his career, which is research. And I want you to, he said it was okay for me to share this, but at the ripe old age of 73, he entered the Doctor of Design program at the University of Calgary to do his pioneering work in BAAKFIL, which he's going to talk about tonight. And it's almost, I'm not sure how this coincidence happened, but today people were sharing this absolutely glowing review of his book with Routledge about BAAKFIL, which was written by Larry Beasley. And I will share with you just one quote from it. This is a must read for developers and architects, but it may be even more eye-opening for homeowners holding a lot of equity, government officials and planners sponsoring new zoning, and neighbors who fret about the loss of their lovely communities. You can find that online, but it is with great pleasure that I turn it over to Dr. Barry Johns to talk about his research.
Wow. Thanks, Doug. I wish everyone would still call me Barry. I'm still not quite used to the idea that there's a DR in front of my name. Actually, it's a DDes that is in front of my name. That's Doctor of Design, which I'm particularly proud of. This is going to be a different type of presentation tonight. I was saying earlier that lectures I've done, and many in the past, have been really highly visual and related to the minutiae around the projects that I've worked on. But as you rightly said, Doug, tonight is going to be a lot about data and research and argument. And then I will show, hopefully, a few pictures that you will remember. But I'd like to talk to students first before we start. I know that many of you already had experience or are now experiencing working in an architect's office, and that you're learning about the profession of architecture and at its core about building design and the environment. We are important contributors to society, but I do feel that our involvement within the public realm is terribly underutilized. Here's the place where you can help through your architecture in the future to impact this narrative. And tonight, I hope I can help to inspire you this way. We are indeed the only profession trained to think about the world differently as change agents, if you like, from 35,000 feet, where our thinking is more holistic than linear and much more connected to a broad spectrum of influence, where our work as a whole can, if it's done well, be seen as much bigger than the sum of its parts. And where we own a professional duty to make the world that we live in, its built environment, a better place for everyone, plus a moral duty to think about and engage our collective humanity. As such, I believe we need to be immersed in the making of public policy and to be courageously committed to the stewardship of better ideas that can ultimately change our world. That's why I chose to study the housing question several years ago with my doctoral research. Originally, I set out to look at densification, to develop an approach that respects the rebuilding of communities through revitalization, especially given what I was learning about the negative impacts that densification is now having with infill in mature neighborhoods, especially. But inevitably, I ended up in a place where affordability became the focal point of this extremely complex issue. I now better understand that the answer to a large part of the housing crisis, while manifesting itself in architecture, is not really about architecture at all. It's really about understanding the agenda that influences architecture, where mass housing is not even considered as architecture. Rather, it's a consumer product, just like your smartphone, governed in this case by the housing industry, which is a major driver of the Canadian economy, and banks that require a predictable product line for resale. Things like development regulations, bylaws, and ultimately, as an unfortunate outcome, the increased cost of land are core and major issues in this large arena. I spent years researching the housing industry, how it works, why it is so homogenous, commodified, and how just about everyone connected to it actually contributes to the housing crisis of supply, lack of choice, and affordability. I've met with bankers, developers, builders, lawyers, accountants, consumers, clients, consultants, community groups, politicians, even CMHC, our national housing organization, and many subject matter experts from all over North America. I traveled across Canada, the USA, and parts of Europe, even during COVID, to see what other cities were doing. I looked at trends like infill that has a comparably short but unfortunate history of community disruption and overscaled, expensive, and what I call disrespectful development, alongside zoning reform that has become all about developer entitlement. We must remember that infill began with the idea of filling in the gaps in neighborhoods caused by derelict housing or unused open space to rededicate land in the urban environment to revitalize communities and promote a more economical use of existing infrastructure to, of course, help reduce sprawl. Now, given the housing crisis, it is encouraged through more aggressive densification and zoning reform to be the panacea to the housing crisis, especially if we increase its supply. I also learned how inefficient our land use is in older, mature neighborhoods, impacted by lot sizes and zoning regulations that go back to the boom building years of the 1950s. Interestingly, to me at least, if you calculate all of the unusable setbacks in a normal neighborhood block, like you see on the left, and add the area of unused or underutilized backyards in these same neighborhoods on the right, you actually find that generally over 70% of private titled residential land in the city is not utilized or is underutilized today. So it's very difficult to summarize such a complex topic, but I can say that the wicked problem of affordability is not being addressed properly by government today. Their answer is just to increase the supply, thinking very erroneously, there's no data that supports this, that such increases in supply will bring down cost, without giving any thought to the much bigger picture of a changing demographic, community impacts, respect, or even agency to existing owners to have a say in the maintenance of the neighborhood. And ultimately, what all of this might do to the reputation of the city itself. Nobody listens to a discussion about demographics and our older population, the desire to age in community and not be displaced. There's no discussion about family reunification or neighborhood culture. There's absolutely zero discussion about zoning reform that maintains the quality of life for neighborhoods that people have been part of and have loved as they've paid off their housing debt and nurtured friendships and community along the way. So here we have a complex matrix of a crisis made up of the commodification of the housing industry, which includes generic, formulaic mass housing and a lack of choice, where we're still building big and creating overscaled and disrespectful new product that is out of touch with what many people want and what a lot of people need. This has to put the spotlight back on analyzing zoning renewal and municipal governance that is systematically removing barriers to development to enable a much smoother path to increase supply only. We're definitely increasing supply very dramatically in Edmonton especially, and yet prices still go up. Now we're seeing more and more of this. Edmonton leads the country now, where since January 24 and the inauguration of its new zoning bylaw, we're running on a path from poorly conceived infill policies to densification policies that enable up to 8 units on a single family lot, 10 on a corner lot, almost anywhere in the city. Most cities in North America that are going through zoning reform consider 4 units as a maximum. And this, of course, is having the impact of atomizing a lot of our neighborhoods. So here we are, a heritage home in the Highlands district of the city where their privacy in their backyard is going to be seriously impacted. Parking and refuse management issues. And here, in the midst of all of that, is a typical mature neighborhood with scale, with tree canopies, and a charming, eclectic collection of housing stock that has evolved over decades. Now, in this same location, we are looking at infill that is so aggressive that is having the impact of creating, even with a large house, the meat in the sandwich. This is not only rude, it's extraordinarily disrespectful. And all of this is supposedly to solve the housing crisis. But most of this is happening at the expense of community. The 2021 census in Canada illustrates that we're no longer an aging population in Canada. We're actually an old population now, despite increased immigration. 41% of Canadians are 55 years of age or older. 19% are over 65. Things are changing. Households are smaller, and yet we continue to build big, even in our mature neighborhoods. There is little discussion about smaller households and building smaller, and no discussion about the cost of land, which is a huge issue. CMHC unbelievably doesn't even acknowledge this as a concern. Moreover, their new MLI Select program offers developers multi-unit mortgage loan insurance through a point system that is predicated on a minimum of 5 units in exchange for a 50-year mortgage, a point system. And all of this is awarded under the guise of all of the typical buzzwords that we're so used to hearing: affordability, social, and environmental outcomes. But I attended an investment seminar on this subject a few weeks ago, and I was astonished. It was clear to me that this is simply a program that encourages speculative investment and wealth storage, and once again, is simply not about making communities. this from our National Housing Authority. Nobody asks if we're doing the right things. Nobody asks if we're really thinking about the future. So how do we unpack all of this? I started with examining land cost. And an existing house that may be 40 or 50 years old is deemed worthless because if it is torn down and the property is subdivided, that property can now double in value and can be developed to a much higher density with infill or other missing middle options that immediately raises the speculative land value and the actual land value when new product is sold in the market. The city, of course, loves this as a new revenue stream because property taxes go up and new units become more expensive every year. So this increase in supply through planned densification and removing barriers to development in mature neighborhoods actually contributes to the affordability crisis in the country, right across the country. In addition, people are feeling forced out of their neighborhoods and out of their social structures that in some cases are decades old. There is already an argument in Edmonton in particular, that zoning reform is not only not improving affordability, it is seriously impacting neighborhoods themselves. So I'm not sure where the redeeming value to the increase in supply in the way this is being handled, at least in my city, through zoning reform, is to be found. Let me be clear, there's no doubt in my mind that densification is absolutely needed in our mature neighborhoods. But why must we start by tearing down good, solid, serviceable existing housing? If we're concerned about the climate crisis and treading lightly on the earth, we should be using and reusing and repurposing as much serviceable housing that we have out there. And we should also be concerning ourselves with the exponential increase in the cost of land over the past 25 years. So after going through all of this, the biggest question for me was, what if the cost of land, which proves to be the biggest barrier to affordability, and nobody talks about this either, could be set at zero? What a crazy idea that would be. An instant increase in affordability. This is such a vast subject that exposes, among many other things, the very complicated intersection between design and, in Canada especially, people of all cultures. The housing industry in North America is still very deeply connected to the post-World War II building boom of the 1950s that saw the rise of the single-family house, a car, a yard, territorial suburbia, and ultimately geographic sprawl. And we're still doing this because the industry itself functions relatively unchanged and unchallenged. It is a major economic driver in our economy with huge impact and power, and yet it remains a relatively unskilled, labor-oriented system compared to the global context of advanced technology, digitization, robotics, and now AI. After all, we're still building with sticks. It continues to yield a monoculture with a lack of choice, ignoring changing graphics to smaller households, older people, multi-generational families, and we still devour green space using the same basic suburban design criteria to change established neighborhoods through densification. This naturally creates fear and antipathy in mature neighborhoods. If we thought that infill was an invasion of character and privacy, new zoning reform is much more invasive. These are product-driven outcomes inside an old, untested industry that is showing us it is unable to create quality design-oriented or sustainable solutions in mature neighborhoods en masse. Individually, people are doing wonderful projects, but en masse, where densification becomes the primary focus. A greenfield site massaged by earth movers for brand new suburban development is just not the same as building much the same product in an older, mature neighborhood with decades of history and a clear sense of place. So we live in a status quo marketplace, and now it's in a major crisis. So it's taken me this long to just explain the problem space. So let me take you on my journey to address the housing crisis and hopefully create some new knowledge. The discovery of land and land cost changes everything. And my big idea is to find a way to eliminate it. BAAKFIL starts by keeping an existing house and a neighborhood streetscape intact. Retention, not demolition, backfilling underutilized land at the back alley, with the owner putting up that land and partnering with the developer. Lane revitalization becomes a very important part of this entire agenda. BAAKFIL is an acronym. It's a densification model that supports preservation of existing housing and population growth at the same time, while improving the urban ecology of a neighborhood by revitalizing its back lanes. So these are the 5 principles: retain the house, create a business model, develop a backyard strategy, utilize back alleys, and promote revitalization of neighborhoods by giving agency to residents to self-organize. BAAKFIL also addresses zoning reform. It easily fits inside the new, much more aggressive densification bylaws, but it minimizes disruption to a neighborhood, as you can see on the right. I call it a respectful development approach. Mature neighborhoods that are targeted for densification that start with demolition don't need to do this to increase densification or population growth. BAAKFIL, on the other hand, starts with the idea that streetscapes and neighborhoods need not be seriously impacted to achieve the desired end result, but they can be retained and still achieve a level of densification that addresses the housing crisis and increases affordability. So the next 4 chapters are background to describe how this is conceived. The first is actually an essay that I wrote, having realized that I've lived in just about every type of housing in Canada through my life. And this clearly influences my thinking about house as home, and made me wonder why many of the pleasurable experiences of my early life, especially, are not even permitted because of so many planning and zoning restrictions today. Even with zoning reform, we're not building or revitalizing communities. We're just increasing supply with little commitment to what I call social sustainability. So this took me from my child infill home in Montreal, where we lived in that little red house in the back of the property, to where we live today. And along that path, I've lived in micro apartments during university, renovated single houses as a young married couple, converted duplexes. We were part of the original residents who moved into the new co-op in False Creek in Vancouver back in the day. We lived for 10 years in the old Unitarian Church in Edmonton that we converted to a work studio loft and a family unit, restoring the 1960s wonderful building by Don Biddorf. Today we find ourselves in a courtyard clustered, self-governed townhouse complex overlooking the deepest ravine in the city. So we've experienced all kinds of housing typologies that have had a huge impact on my research. I've also reflected upon several precedent projects that have an impact on the housing agenda, notably Rudolf Schindler's house on Kings Road in Los Angeles. I think I visited about 8 times. An experiment in co-housing designed for Schindler and his wife Pauline and another couple, Clyde and Marion Chase, and of course, Unité d'habitation by Le Corbusier in Marseille and other cities in Europe, the first high-rise residential buildings to utilize mixed use, 2-story suites, educational and recreational amenities on the roof. Unité revolutionized the housing market in Europe, and historians argue that Schindler introduced modernism to North America here in Los Angeles in 1922. So architects can make a difference, and I've often wondered why we haven't in the housing industry. So I've reflected on my own work going back to the very beginning of my practice in the early 1980s that also influences the research and my approach. This includes understanding the value of courtyard housing, and in the case of the lower project on the left, a social services building that is more about respect to a neighborhood context and its clientele. It blends into the neighborhood and is so self-effacing, you can't find it without knowing its address. I've also tasted the infill market myself, trying to establish an infill response that's more respectful to context and not oversized or domineering. And perhaps the biggest project that we have done, happily with Peter Busby's office, is the original international competition winning zero carbon, actually a regenerative energy community master plan, in effect the new 15-minute city for 25,000 people over 25 years on the old 550-acre municipal airport land, Blatchford in Edmonton. So personal and professional experience, research, and numerous projects each inform the work. In this next segment, I want to speak about the overarching social justice imperative, or what I actually call social sustainability, as it relates to affordability, aging in community, and resilient cities. And this brings me to the business model. So I'll just leave this slide up and talk over it for a moment. But this shows how the idea of an owner partnering with a developer to put up his or her land to enable development to occur on their property while the owner stays in place and retains tenure in that same property. And because they're partnered with the developer, they share in the proceeds of sales or rent of any of the units that are built on the lot. Equity leveraging is key to unlocking underutilized land and fractionalizing it for shared use. The diagram explains the relationship where the owner provides the equity, the land as collateral for development, and the developer builds at zero land cost without having to purchase or finance the purchase of that same land. So land cost is entirely removed from the project pro forma for the developer. That reduces the development cost and instantly creates lower price points and increased affordability for the consumer. In Edmonton, based on the average cost of housing in the city, this kind of savings can reach anywhere from $150,000 to $300,000 per unit. And of course, much more in cities like Vancouver and Toronto, where land costs are significantly higher. The owner's equity percentage share becomes its proportionate share in the proceeds of the sale of the units. Land cost is also mitigated to the consumer as well, because the sale of any new units is very much unlike infill, where you must buy half of a titled lot that has been subdivided. This is just a simple repurposed bare land condominium model where you only buy the land underneath your unit. So the amount of land to be purchased is considerably less than half of a titled lot, which is the infill model typically. So the whole idea of finding instant major dollars in savings in new development is inherent to the land component of the BAAKFIL business model. CMHC is spending most of its time trying to figure out ways to build things cheaper, dealing with the minutiae details of the industry, new natural fiber insulation products, for example, completely ignoring a much bigger picture and just how easy it can be to leverage it to make housing more affordable. The banks agreed. This can be done with conventional financing and the land as collateral. The much bigger idea, of course, is that this is scalable. Once we move through the barriers to recognize smaller households, building smaller, and community buy-in, we can actually apply this model across every mature neighborhood in the city, not just on one lot, and indeed deploy this idea in cities across the entire country. This process, the fractionalization of land, gives way to possibilities that I've nicknamed 25 in 25 in 25. But first, let me stay with one lot so we can be clear about the fractionalization of land and the big difference between backfill and most infill projects. So here's an example. Infill occupies half of a titled lot. What you're looking at on the right are actually two infill projects on the same size lot as the very small ranch house on the left. You have to tear down a decent, possibly reusable house, demolish it first to achieve densification. How ironic is this? Tear something down to increase the density. Landowners have to sell and move, and the high price of infill is passed on to the consumer. Backfill eliminates displacement, retention versus demolition, and is much more economical because it mitigates the high cost of land. Now, to show you in very simple terms how this is simply to be compared, it makes it clear if you take the idea of building at the same cost per square foot, just academically speaking, and the same amount of area between a backfill project and an infill project. You're saving money on demolition and you're saving significant amounts on land. So the difference in cost is very significant. In fact, most infill projects are almost always larger than what is being proposed in the backfill model. So the difference in cost here is even higher. Now, to show you how this is scalable, here's the same typical underutilized block that I showed to you earlier. The red circle is the site of a demonstration project that I will get to show you in a minute. The yellow poche in the image illustrates a 25% uptake, committing backfill on only 25% of the typical block. It's hardly noticeable. So you could take this block and multiply it into a neighborhood context by the number of blocks within that neighborhood. You could then multiply it again by the number of neighborhoods in the city and phase in this uptick over a 25-year period, a generation, as a very modest intervention. On all of the single-family lots that were to commit backfill, this can generate in Edmonton's 84 plus mature neighborhoods a potential population increase of 250,000 people. That's why I nicknamed this idea 25 and 25 and 25. Interestingly to me, on the larger pie lots alone, which there are several of them in every neighborhood, the same population forecast using the same calculations would provide on pie lots alone an increase of 25,000 people over the same generation. That's the same population forecast originally contemplated for the Blatchford Lands Master Plan over 25 years on a greenfield site, actually a brownfield site. So it shows how a modest intervention like this can have a very sizable impact in the same amount of time on newfound land, even if 75% of landowners say, you know what, this just isn't for me. So a very small minority that pick up on the idea could play this model out across the country. And if you did that, it could translate into millions in population growth over 25 years. That's a staggering number that I think needs to be understood by politicians and industry to get the context behind the principle of the housing crisis. Because I believe it's actually possible to do it all. Increase the supply, increase density, increase affordability, increase community acceptance by including landowners and not victimize a neighborhood's essence by destroying its character. I'd like to hold on to that thought for a moment because I want to reaffirm that this encompasses much more than affordability. There is, as I've already mentioned, this overarching social sustainability imperative to the big idea of removing land cost to increase affordability. And it's all about making connections for all peoples. Our theme for the Blatchford Master Plan was to make connections, historically, socially, economically, and environmentally. We actually coined the phrase connecticity, and it goes to the essence of the 15-minute resilient city. This deeply influences my approach to mature neighborhoods, retention and growth without widespread demolition and erasure of history. It means providing agency to landowners who wish to remain in place to age in their community and actually influence the growth and revitalize their own neighborhood by investing in it. In many cases, people have lived in these communities for decades. They have a friendship circle. They have a family history. They have friends and neighbors, even kin. This is their social sustainability network that gets completely dismantled if they're pushed out of their community for new development. So to me, this is an overdue proposition for us as architects, especially to intervene, to address and promote the realities of demographic currency, taking heed of the social patterns of our time, especially now where aging parents and their families increasingly choose to live closer together at home or on the same property, we'll say, to combat the affordability crisis. At the same time, with backfill, the owner gets to monetize their asset but they can still bring their family closer together, or they can bring friends or colleagues or others closer together so that their social network of theirs can be sustained. The intergenerational living pattern that we're seeing is rapidly and organically arising, where children can move back onto the same property or into the same neighborhood where they have been raised, but cannot otherwise afford to buy a standalone house. But now they can live in different units on the same property. Likewise for aging parents or an extended family. But there are very few options out there that suit those needs in our communities. BAAKFIL promotes this idea alongside the design of sustainable and respectful architecture that's responsive to neighborhood context. It's a building typology that doesn't overwhelm the scale of existing housing in the neighborhood. In drawing broader conclusions about density, the microcommunity, and sustainable resilient cities, it also improves the ecology of urban neighborhoods through streetscape preservation and advocating the revitalization of the city alley. The social sustainability perspective includes respect for growing a neighborhood without dramatically changing it. This is to me the essence of the resilient 15-minute city, a living organism created and nurtured by the very people who live in it. I'm reminded of Jane Jacobs, who famously wrote in her book, The Death and Life of Great American Cities, that cities have the capability of providing something for everybody, only because and only when they're created by everybody. So for proof of concept and how to actually make BAAKFIL, this next chapter is about a design toolkit. It's a set of principles published in a 50-page booklet that showcases BAAKFIL with several typological examples. It's a pragmatic approach to sustainable design. It respects site, climate, and context with numerous planning layouts and sizes. Starts with an infrastructure core and a square pinwheel plan that can be torqued on a site to respond where the sun comes from and to where the wind blows. The industry is driven by pragmatic land use efficiencies without any sensitivity to orientation, topography, or views. So in a new subdivision, you might end up with headlight beams in your living room at night, or no sun in your backyard, and BAAKFIL can address all of this. The pinwheel plan enables a lot of different unit options and interchangeable layouts in a very small footprint, no larger than a 2-car garage. So it's unthreatening to neighborhoods concerned with overdevelopment. The infrastructure core deals with servant and serve spaces, Lucan's favorite expression, and all the primary services are stacked. And because of this and many other attributes, it can be set up as a net zero type of arrangement, either in an initial project or designed to achieve it in a later time. So the infrastructure core becomes the planning backbone for a BAAKFIL development. Then from this, the core can evolve anywhere up to about 1,500 square feet, over 2 or 2.5 stories, even with a rental suite at the lower level. All of the units can accommodate porches, or roof decks, or both. They're intended to be designed by others, which is why it's a toolkit, so that the homogeneity of the housing industry is challenged. So individual builders, designers, and architects can take the planning principles and evolve their own interpretation of the BAAKFIL principles to do their own thing. Importantly, with an aging population, BAAKFIL is adaptable to universal design for seniors to thrive. This is critical to the model and is where the Schindler influence cuts deep, where an upper level can be a roof deck, a sleeping pavilion, a private porch, or a garden. Any number of different uses, really, with an internal lift that enables those that are confined to wheelchairs or those that have difficulty with level changes to navigate a 2-level residence. The toolkit can also be used to demonstrate a variety of other typologies that can evolve from using them. This includes cottage court typologies, missing middle, even using more than one existing house with neighbors coming together to combine their lots. Now I will finally get around to showing you the potential of BAAKFIL in 2 demonstration projects to give you a sense of the mature neighborhood context and my design interpretation of gentle and respectful densification. Again, using the same block that I've been using in Dovercourt. And you can see a sketch of the plan in the upper left-hand corner. But first, let's get a sense of what the neighborhood is like, because this is really a typical post-war, verdant, middle-class, mature neighborhood, which you can recognize one way or another right across the country. You have existing houses built in the late 50s or the early 60s, a leafy street with a large mature tree canopy. Some houses have been renovated, yielding a charming and eclectic character that has evolved over decades. So this particular neighborhood is very typical in the city of Edmonton, but it's also one that you all know because it exists everywhere across the country, perhaps using different materials that are common to the locations where you find them. But the essence of the idea of neighborhood and community is very much the same. In this case, the average price of a house and property in this neighborhood, which is seemed to be a slightly lower middle class neighborhood, is in the order of about $450,000 to $500,000, which today is a very economical number compared to cities like Calgary, Vancouver, Toronto, Montreal, even Halifax. But because of the cost of land, it's still all relative. There's something wonderfully satisfying and serene about these places where people have built their lives and have lived here for decades, but they are now next to other built-up parts of the city, such as the industrial precinct, which is a huge employment center now in the city's west end. You get a sense of where you are in the city and how well connected you are through the road networks, with subdivision block layouts, relatively large lots, and open space. With increased improvements in transit, these mature neighborhoods end up being closer, not visually necessarily, but closer in terms of functionality to their downtowns and to open spaces that connect with schools and churches and community centers, putting them once again in large demand, in this case with people who wish to live with a lesser reliance on the automobile. So this is the site of the demonstration project. Big trees, next door to a couple of other very similar units. And the property itself is quite neutral and unobtrusive. And because of that, because of its size, it's possible to build 3 backfill units with an amenity space in the middle that becomes part of a common amenity area for the site. The scale of the units is smaller than many of the houses that are down the block. The interesting thing about this is that with 3 new units and the existing house all facing common areas for the entire development, the development itself is not visible from the street. So in terms of plan, the existing house is on the right, and 3 new units, 2 on the upper part of the slide and 1 a universal unit on the bottom part of the slide. And connecting them together is a trellis and a garden and an open space with parking in the back. To illustrate the flexibility of backfill, one of the units has a hair salon that faces the alley at the lower level. And another one next to it includes a lower level rental unit and a universal unit to the south. The upper bedroom areas include workspace or roof gardens. So a simple plan between 900 to 1,500 square feet, with all rooms fitting into a comfortable 12-foot module. There are no basements, but the lower levels are partially let into the ground to reduce building scale and to use the natural insulating characteristics of the earth to reduce heat loss. And the compact 24 by 24 footprint is no larger than a 2-car garage, as I mentioned, which is to the south of the picture. So ultimately, the streetscape and the neighborhood character here is not altered by backfill whatsoever. Indeed, there's more space between the backfill units than there is at the corners of the neighboring houses. One of the things that community groups who have seen these proposals and the toolkit relate to is the idea of the respectful scale of a 2-car garage. People really appreciate also that big trees are not being torn down, and more importantly, that old houses are not being torn down. In fact, building smaller with simple construction can still yield some pretty interesting, even compelling development in keeping with today's demographic of of smaller households and families choosing to live closer together. The micro-community development potential of the back alley can also be transformed with landscaping and activity in such a way that we can look at social interaction with, again, little impact on the streetscape and the front addresses of the existing houses on a quiet street. Here, a back rain garden, a moonlighted garden, a winter context. Neighborhood interaction and social sustainability is a vital part of this whole cohesion. So micro-community development for resilient cities is very much a part of the agenda for BAAKFIL. It cannot just be about increasing supply at any cost. And it is not just about finding a way to make things more affordable, but to continue to reinforce an existing mature neighborhood social sustainability context and improve upon that context with respectful development. I've actually tested this model in other cities, from Halifax to Vancouver, including this one in Kelowna, this time without a back alley, that celebrates the unique climatological characteristics of Kelowna, with a solar array, flying planters, some will recognize that, living walls, and a dry creek stormwater landscape strategy. All of this is to show that these buildings can be completely different from one another using the same planning principles, with different appearances, and yet they're all integrated one way or another within their surroundings. This is intended ultimately to illustrate, if you like, the flexibility of the model, that you can do a number of different things with the BAAKFIL strategy and infrastructure core. In the right hands and with the right architects, I think this guarantees that no two units would be alike anywhere. And that separates BAAKFIL from the predictable homogeneity of the house building industry. Now, I want to show you demonstration project number 2. We're almost done. As proof of concept, I have purchased a property to develop the idea further with a 1954, circa 1954 bungalow in a mature neighborhood. The idea behind it, of course, is to keep the existing house on the left, add a nanny suite to the lower level, and develop 2 new units in the backyard on the right-hand side, facing 2 lanes, playful, in scale, site-specific, and it fits into the block. Here's the area. It actually sits next to a 10-unit complex on a corner with no amenities, no trees, they've been torn down, no community connection whatsoever. This is one of the new rental projects under the CMHC MLI Select program that to me underscores the need to take another look at the meaning of densification and how it impacts community in a city building context to fit in and make places. This to me is how maintaining social sustainability becomes as important as environmental sustainability. So my property is on the left. The original house on the corner is the middle photograph at the bottom. And there's a street view of the new project of 10 units under construction that consists of a 4-unit townhouse, 4 rental units in a basement level, and then a 4 single car garage and 2 units on top facing the lane. So the neighborhood is comprised of the typical mature neighborhoods in the city with gardens and motorhomes and garages and whatnot. The idea that attracted me to this property was very mature trees in the front, a very small but productive orchard of cherry trees, apple trees, and a pear tree in the back. And a natural open courtyard space with a Scots pine that is almost as tall as the trees in the front. So the site almost designed itself in terms of what could be done with it. And so what will be done with it, you basically, I hope it will look like these new units have always been there, and that they fit in completely with the surrounding neighborhoods. These will be small units in the order of 900 to 1100 square feet with studio space and living space. There actually are no partitions except for one floor of the new units. Basically, it's intended to be a large collection of loft spaces. This is the back yard with the garage that exists, and alongside it and the fence will be taken out. The garage is falling apart. The house is in very good condition. And I've just done some playful sketches to illustrate the utilization potential of the courtyard space for summer block parties, for patios and barbecues that could involve the neighbors as well as those that live there. The obvious skating rink in the wintertime, and of course it can also be used for parking. So working drawings are complete. We're hoping we have the development permit paperwork is pending. We've made it through all of the channels with the city, including transportation, which was a tough one. And we hope to start construction next month. Already have a demolition permit in place for the garage. So to end this lecture, I'd like to use a design, what I call a design fiction narrative, to pretend that we fast forward 5 years, where we go back to the first demonstration project that I showed you, as if it's been built for a while, and quickly take a tour through the eyes of a new owner to understand the impact that BAAKFIL has in their life and in the neighborhood. So we call this Life on the Pilot, and you can just read along at the bottom and try and imagine yourself living there. My throat is dry, so I'll take a moment and grab some water. Okay, I sure appreciate you listening to all of this. Let me conclude by stating that BAAKFIL is just one idea about making housing more affordable for Canadians, perhaps even beyond our own borders as well, but connecting it to community at the same time. It's self-effacing, it's current, and it's really simple. And I recognize that 25 and 25 and 25 is not expected to be acceptable for everyone, but it is a technically advanced, economically and environmentally responsible urban housing typology, adaptable to a range of site, climate, social, and cultural contexts. It does develop new methods and operational structures to allow its principles to be incorporated by the design and the development community, working beyond the familiar client architect model. It can be implemented within the existing structure of the house building industry, and importantly, the banking system. It addresses the housing question and represents innovation at potentially societal scale. It is a guide to illustrate the potential of affordable and respectful densification in mature neighborhoods. that over time can yield a significant population growth with redeeming socio-cultural value. I really want to see other architects getting involved in making places and having an impact well beyond just doing custom housing. So my hope is that BAAKFIL can stimulate architects, designers, and builders to use the toolkit to influence their own work and become better engaged with the housing question and contribute to sorting out this urgent need about revitalization and affordability in our communities. Let's all help to impact this narrative. Thanks.
Thank you so much, Barry. That was a truly inspiring and thought-provoking lecture. Greatly appreciate you sharing your insights, not only on densification and affordability, but the importance about community, kinship, and care as we think about housing. So thank you so much. We're going to open up the time now to any questions. Please feel free to place them in the chat or simply raise your hand and ask Barry directly. Barry, we have a number of questions in the chat already, so I can moderate them for you as we receive them. But I was wondering, I had one question to start, if I may ask. In the lecture, you mentioned about, densification in urban environments and suburban environments. Do you imagine that there's a place for backfill in rural and regional communities across Canada as well?
Veronica, I've been asked this question many times, and each time I hear it, I'm beginning to realize that it must be. It needs to be. I remember a discussion I had at the university about whether or not this type of model could actually make sense in northern climates, and the answer to that, I believe, is yes. And also whether it could be applicable to Indigenous residential circumstances, either in the north or even in our urban realm. So I believe that the honest answer is yes, I believe it can be. I think my pragmatic answer is that it should be. And my honest answer, again, is that I haven't really given it much thought because of the level of complexity and the enormity of the work effort that would be required to pull that off. This is where I'm hoping to stimulate other professionals to engage in the idea and to take it to another level within their own context. But I totally agree, and wouldn't it be wonderful if it could be applicable across a much broader range of utilization, and I think that would be magic if we could pull it off.
That's wonderful to hear. Barry, as you may know, we're working on a research project right now that looks at building low carbon communities across rural and regional communities in Canada, because simply they haven't been focused on, for that much currently in terms of, providing funding or even just models for development and increase of housing supply that is culturally appropriate, but also supports the aspects of community and family. And one of the things we've been looking at in that project as well, because of logistic considerations across Canada and material supply and just even, skills of building, we've been looking at prefabrication and modular construction. And I wanted to ask maybe a follow-up question if you see a place for that as well in your concepts.
Absolutely, I do. And I'm glad you brought it up because it has always bothered me that we continue to build with sticks. And so the demonstration project that we're doing, we've actually contracted with a company in Brandon, Manitoba that is making a highly insulated, high density polystyrene panel system. It's Greenstone Products out of Brampton. So it's a fully Canadian made product. It's load bearing. It has enormous insulation value that enables us to eliminate thermal bridging entirely. And when you partner it with triple glazing and other more sustainable approaches to everything from appliances to waterproofing, you end up with a model that can actually preclude the need to use wood frame construction. We are currently looking at doing the floor construction with steel channels as opposed to wood frame, and the jury's out on that still. But this same panel can actually be a sub base, a floor on the ground, which provides an even greater thermal resistance than an insulated concrete slab would provide without the expense. And the cost of these panels, remarkably, it is very, very competitive with conventional wood frame construction. So that's the beginning. The second thing is the infrastructure core can, in and of its own, be component manufactured and prefabricated. The core itself and the usual things that you might expect, from cabinetry to even doors and panels and the like. I personally don't believe that prefabrication as a whole, in terms of making a prefabricated modular housing unit, will ever make it in Canada economically, because we just live so far apart from one another. People here in Alberta are expert in doing modular construction, and companies like ATCO have been servicing remote communities with their prefabricated modules for decades. And if they ever saw a niche in the housing market to turn that into a viable opportunity to grow their own product line in the industry, they would have done it a long time ago. The reality is, when you have prefabricated modules that have to be shipped across the country, say, even across a province, the regulations for traffic and transportation vary in this country from province to province. Very often these modules, like shipping containers, have to be hoisted with a crane into a site. Power lines have to be temporarily shut down, and all the economies that may come from manufacturing an entire unit in a factory are mitigated by all these additional charges of transportation and installation. So I think the answer is a modularized componentry analysis for this type of work, and where you can simply manufacture bits and pieces and flatbed them on a small truck to a location that's close to where they were manufactured from. I use the IKEA model as an example. Every city in the country has IKEA, and if IKEA has done anything right, it's their modular kitchens and bathrooms that are extraordinarily sophisticated and beautifully designed given their price point. And so to me, there's something that can be learned from that. So small scale prefabrication, I think, is very viable in Canada. I'm not sure large scale will ever be.
Yeah, that's great. So more of a kit of parts,
Exactly.
panelized modularity. Interesting enough, I've learned that IKEA is doing modular housing through a kit of part component, like you're
Yes.
speaking of, in
Yeah.
Sweden. So they've evolved from interiors now to full buildings.
Yeah.
But I'll turn to our chat box here. There's a comment and question from Vanessa, where it's mentioned, "This is such an inspiring presentation, very reminiscent of the pocket neighborhood concept, which I wish we saw more of in Canada. This seems much more approachable. What challenges do you see in places that lack back alleys to be able to employ this concept?"
That's a really good question, and one of the reasons why I took on looking at the project in Kelowna, and another one which I didn't show in Halifax, is that there are many cities in the country that don't have back alleys in the sense that we understand them. And it's often driven by topography or other planning methodologies that were given precedence back in the day. I still believe that it's possible to access a rear yard comfortably from a street, as long as there's enough of a dimension between the existing house and the backyard vis-a-vis the setback requirements and things like that. It has associated with it a few other challenges, fire protection and servicing and the like. But I do believe it's possible, and I did, with a little experimenting in Kelowna that I was able to complete in fairly short order, at least begin to show myself that the potential is there. but I haven't admittedly spent a lot of time dealing with it because a large part of what this model represents is the notion of utilizing the back alleys of the city to revitalize a neighborhood without impacting its existing street. But I think there's something we could learn from that, and I think the challenge is daunting, but I think it could be quite exciting at the same time.
Great, thank you.
A very good question.
There's another question here. What approach did you take to address existing zoning and neighborhood limitations, setbacks, lot coverage, etc.?
Well, I said at the outset that in a sense, the city of Edmonton has done it for me because they have enabled through the new zoning much more freedom with respect to setbacks, site coverage, and the like. Having said that, I will observe that there is some spectacularly beautiful infill in the city of Edmonton. But all of that seemed to stop when the new bylaws came out. And so the idea of reducing barriers to enable more freedom to do whatever you want has not netted a better level of quality. In fact, I would argue it's done the reverse. But the city still has a penchant of finding ways to put up barriers to, in a way, have at times a serious impact on the way in which development can be done. I cite the transportation department as one. So I had a bit of a battle with them without going into all the details. I basically on the development permit drawing showed the courtyard in the demonstration project as a multi-purpose courtyard. And we're saving all the trees, and the site actually qualifies as a natural rain garden because we don't need to connect to the storm lines. The trees' roots suck up all the water, even this summer with a couple of heavy rains that we had. But I made the mistake of saying in the development permit package that the courtyard could also be used for parking, thinking that it would be more useful in the wintertime when the ground is frozen and there's less activity if there's no skating rink. Anyway, transportation got back and said, well, if you're going to park there, then we ask you to pave everything. And so they're not skilled in terms of being able to look at the big picture, nor are they able to make value judgments in terms of what's good for a property or a neighborhood and what's not. And without wanting to sound critical about it, their mandate is basically to make sure all the boxes are checked. And I've been a proponent for years of getting back to the design panel methodology that a lot of cities across the country have had success with. We tried it here, but it was never fully launched in as much as the design panel system only could make recommendations and did not have any authority to make change or to obligate a better use of a site or without kind of dictating color and materials without being able to make value judgments of any consequence about design. And that still is the case, I'm afraid to say, in the city. So to be honest with you, this project fits easily within the existing bylaws. And I think what it comes down to is that it's incumbent on us architects to not just worry about that, but to do better. And because the house building industry doesn't use architects typically unless it's for more than 4 units, 5 units, where an architect is required in a multi-family environment. But infill could be done by draftsmen and is done very often by builders. Some are very, very good. Some are, in fact, extremely good. Custom builders that I've known for a number of years have done some extraordinary work. And as I say, there is a lot of it out there. But the quality has gone down, it seems to me, in the last couple of years, ironically, since the new bylaws came into play.
It's very interesting, this connection to, jurisdictions and bylaws. So Barry, there's a comment here from CJ, and they note that they have a question and then later ask if they can engage with you in a discussion as they're director of the Federation of Calgary Communities. So I just wanted to invite CJ if they would like to ask the question or unmute to speak to Barry at this time, or perhaps connect with you after the lecture through
Or
email.
send me an email with your coordinates and I'll get in touch with you.
Great. Maybe I'll post your email in the
Sure. And say hello to Teresa Goldstein for me. She's a dear friend and part of the original cohort in our DDes program. And she's the director of planning now in the city of Calgary.
Okay, wonderful. So I'm going to just paste your email if that's okay to share in the
Sure.
chat
It's on the
box.
screen.
Oh,
My
wonderful.
website is on the screen and my email is on the screen.
Oh, there you go. Perfect.
Yeah.
Great. There's another question by Daniel, and he asks, if the rear garage is being removed to make room for new units, do you expect any issues with parking and the increased number of vehicles in the area?
Yes, yes. Again, if I've been asked this question once, I've been asked it 100 times. I personally think the bigger problem is refuse collection and refuse collection management. Parking is going to be a problem. It is, especially when you see the 8 and 10 unit projects that are going up in a lot of these neighborhoods, including this monster right next to my unit, where anybody with a car that's larger than a compact will not be able to navigate inside those single unit garages. So even though garages have been provided, they're not going to be very functional. They'll probably be used for storage. I believe what's going to happen is the following. Neighborhoods have an uncanny way of figuring out how to self-govern. And I think that the city will be obligated to issue parking permits that are particular to the neighborhoods that they're in. They do that now in several mature neighborhoods in the city, including around recreation facilities like the football stadium, for example, is a good example. But many older neighborhoods that have yield streets and a lack of parking on the street to begin with are subject to permits. So that is clearly going to happen. I also think that what's going to happen is that people will start using their existing garages again and not leave their cars on the street. I've studied these neighborhoods, and you may find it hard to believe in our cold climate, but people still prefer to park outside and plug in their cars because the simple fact of the matter is that if you park on the street, it's a shorter walkway to get to from your car to your front door with your groceries, and you only have to clean one walkway of snow. Whereas if we take the typical 50 by 150 lot, let alone the pie lots, with a separate unheated, unattached garage at the back, the distance it takes to get from your vehicle to your house is much longer. And if you do a survey around the neighborhoods, and I've done in 3 neighborhoods, in the wintertime especially, there are, I would say, a majority of people, 50% plus 1, do not even shovel their back driveways where their garages are when they park on the street. And most garages are used for storage and not for parking anyway. So I think it's a bit of it's contentious with those that are really fussed about the parking problem, because I'm not suggesting for a minute that it's not real. But I am going to suggest that people figure out ways to deal with it. And I also think I'll end this by saying a lot of these people that are going to rediscover their garages, if they get rid of all that stuff that's taking up space in them, are going to start renting out other portions of their backyard for parking, which is what happens in and around our sports venues, where if you want to go to a football game, you can take your car and you can park in someone's backyard, and it costs you $10, but that is what it is. I suspect that's going to become a mini hustle for a lot of mature neighborhoods, and for those that are interested in it, I think it's viable. Is it good urban design? Of course not. Is it the best way to use property? Of course not. But a number of these mature neighborhoods are less reliant on the car now than they were 10 years ago because of the increase in transit and a lesser reliance on the automobile. So I think in some ways the problem is not going to be solved, but in some ways the problem will be alleviated to a larger degree than what we imagine, just through the ingenuity of the community itself.
Yes, absolutely. I think reimagining parking is really important in how we look at planning for sure. Um, well, we still have a few minutes left and just wondering if anybody else had any questions. Please feel free to just open your mic and ask as well. Let's put it in the chat box.
I have a quick question.
Sure.
Thank you, Barry. What a fantastic presentation. Very exciting work. Congratulations. What an achievement. Do you have any thoughts on the optimal, or is there an optimal tenure type for backfill housing? Or are you relatively agnostic about a condo strata structure versus a co-op versus a single owner rental? Is the model equally kind of usable across tenure types, in your opinion?
In my opinion, yes. I go to that in the final chapter of the book, where
Mm.
I had a mentor, a friend of mine who I've known for 40 years, who I asked if he would look at my draft and comment on it. And we had a sit down before I finalized my thesis document, and he asked that same question. So I looked at the idea of co-op models. I've looked at co-housing. I've looked at the idea of a rental situation. In fact, the demonstration project I'm doing, Matthew, is going to be packaged as a rental intergenerational property. There's a real market for it here. And so I'm hoping that I can actually test the veracity of it in the community with this project. And obviously, it started with a modified condo situation, but I predict that co-op models are going to become more popular in the country. They have not been typically. It's ironic because half of New York City is co-op housing, but and we lived in a co-op in Vancouver. It was a non-equity co-op. Toronto now allows equity co-ops, so there are a number of different variables that can come out of all that. In addition, I've been looking at the idea of healthcare, the idea of a NORC, a naturally occurring retirement community, where a cottage court type of arrangement like the pilot demonstration project could actually be morphed into a small scale care facility or lodge, where you could think of one unit as a living unit, one unit as a sleeping unit, one unit as a dining or a care unit. And I've been playing with that as I watch TV at night, and I'm really excited by the prospects of it all. And I'm trying to rationalize how to make something out of all of that without muddying the water too much. And in effect, trying to be all things to all people, which as an architect, we always want to be able to say we are, but it's absolutely not feasible. That in addition to the idea that I think there should be an actual limit to the number of these types of projects that are allowed to occur in a neighborhood. I believe in the free market, but people have asked me, what's the capacity of backfill on a block, or what's the capacity of backfill in a neighborhood before it too becomes so pervasive that it gets in the way of others that just want to be left alone and live in their own environment. And I've thought about that a lot. And I default back to 25% because I think it's a benign number in many ways. And if you remember the images, I think in my mind, intellectually can justify that. But I worry about trying to be all things to all people. But I take your point. There are many different tenures that are possible within the industry. It seems to me, from a design and building perspective, from a financing and from a permitting and a licensing perspective, it may not be quite the same. But again, I haven't looked into that in much detail. But it's a brilliant question, and I love the idea of when people say it looks pretty flexible to me. Can you do this? And I say, well, of course, right? But is it realistic? I don't know.
Thanks, Barry.
Does that answer your question?
Absolutely, 100%. Yeah, that's very interesting. Thanks so much.
Thank you.
There, we have a question from one of our students, Brooklyn. Please go ahead, Brooklyn.
Thank you for your presentation, Barry. I live close to Humboldt, Saskatchewan, and we see a lot of cookie cutter, really quick homes go up in the neighborhood. And I'm curious if you have any recommendations on, anything that I guess we can do, whether it's maybe joining a board in the city or if there's, yeah, any way you think we could get involved to maybe educate homeowners a little bit more or just try to change, I guess, the way that it's done. I always look at these homes and feel like we can use those budgets better.
Oh man, that's the best question of the night. Thank you. Um, if you're still studying and trying to decide what you look like 5 years from now, I would really recommend that you become an advocate for design, urban design and architecture in your community as best you can. And how that can begin is just talking about architecture in elementary schools, in high schools, showing people examples of how you can do things better. Meet with your city administrators. Find someone that can work alongside you as a champion and listen and have them listen and hopefully through osmosis, let's say, they kind of catch on to it, and then you build a network from there. The idea of a design panel in a rural community is, I think, a really, really good idea. Not easy to implement because rural communities, as you well know, are filled, especially on the prairie, with independent thinkers and those who aren't used to or like being told what to do or even advised as to what they can do. The prairie zeitgeist is one of ferocious independence and independent thinking, and I believe that can get in the way. But at the same time, an intelligent conversation with a person that is a thinker can go a long way. So I would really salute you taking that on. And I would wish you nothing but success, but start with advocating the importance of design. Start with that. Like you think about design, whether you realize it or not. When you're buying a sweater or a new pair of shoes, people are thinking about design. What looks good, what feels good, what fits best. Use those types of analogies to bring it to the built environment and see how it resonates. What do you think about when you buy a pair of shoes? What do you think about when you buy a sweater? You care what it looks like? Of course you do, right? Whereas other people say, well, I just live in a house. I don't care what it looks like. I just want it to keep me warm. There's more to life than that. And that's your mission.
Thank you.
I hope that makes sense.
Okay, thank you. We have one more question in the chat from CJ. Could you address the POAS, personal outdoor amenity space? The new blanket rezoning in Calgary does not insist for personal private amenity space. Even Hausman promoted POAS.
I can't address it specifically because I don't know all the detail, but I will say that it's a potentially controversial topic because whenever it comes to your private life living inside the property line, you don't want to be over-regulated by those that have enormous influence outside of your immediate property line. And one example that comes to mind, and it goes to private amenity space, is mature trees on a site. And people have asked me, for example, and I'm not trying to stray from the topic, but I hope it's related, trees and private amenity space. Everyone has the right to do what they need to do to help enrich their lives inside their property line. And a lot of people say, well, that includes not chopping down a mature tree inside your property line, doesn't it? And in my mind, it does, but I'm loath to support legislation that can be overbearing in that regard and basically remove the kind of freedoms that people enjoy when they have spent a lot of money buying their private property. Having said that, the courtyard in the demonstration project flips that on its side, I suppose, in the sense that I've been thinking about the courtyard as a public amenity area that can be shared with the neighborhood, but on the terms of the people that are living on the property. The idea of a block party, the idea of it, even in the first demonstration project with a block party underneath the trellis, that kind of social connection goes a long way to building community and to establishing relationships, which ultimately translates into a safer neighborhood for people. And so there's got to be a balance between the two. I don't like the idea of prescriptive bylaws. So you can imagine that I wouldn't like the idea of prescriptive bylaws inside the property line. But not everybody feels the same way as I do. I mean, I believe that there needs to be a much greater level of social connection. But at the same time, I don't want anybody telling me how to run my business or putting me under an umbrella along with everybody else where I have to follow rules that are completely nonsensical. So I'm a bit of a chameleon, I guess, in that regard.
Yeah. Well, thank you, Barry. I guess it's about choice, and at the core of it as well, though, it's about community and about living. So I appreciate that response for sure. Well, we're just at time now, and Barry, thank you so much on behalf of Athabasca University and the REIC Center for Architecture, on behalf of the Global Studio and the Cross Canada Housing Super Studio, as well as Architects Against Housing Alienation. I want to express our sincere appreciation for you sharing your research, your experience, and your vision with us tonight. Thank you again for, inspiring us to critically think about how we design, how we teach, how we live, and also for advocacy. I think that was a really important point, really to build equitable housing futures in Canada. So thank you. Thanks to everyone. The lecture will be posted on our Center for Architecture website, which I'm going to put in the chat right now. And I'll also share the link to whoever is registered. And if there's any final statements, Douglas, I know you've opened your camera and mic if you want to say any final statements.
Just thank you. It was a great presentation. It's wonderful work, and thank you as well, Veronica, for organizing this. I think the Cross Country Housing Studio is actually a wonderful initiative. I hope we can do more of those.
Yes, and thank you, Matthew, who's one of the leading collaborators and organizers of that. So thank you so much, Matthew, and everyone else involved in that. Great. Well, just a quick note to the students that are here from my studio. We're going to be meeting in our next Zoom room. So please meet up for our studio session this evening, and we'll see you all. So thank you so much. Thanks, Barry. We'll chat soon.
Veronica and Doug, thank you so much for the honor of doing this.
Thanks, Barry.
Okay. Good night, everybody.
Good night.
Hey, Barry, thank you. Thanks, Veronica.
Thanks,
Douglas. See you soon.
Thanks. Good night.
Right.
Good night. Bye-bye.
Cheers. Bye-bye.